Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Dr. KRS Murthy. And hello, everyone. This is Lakshmi. And today I'll be talking about how how do we start with the data, the process of model building, starting with the data set. And I have bundled up few things I've learned in my experience in ML practice in Amazon. So let's get started. So the motive of my talk is, let's say you are an ML practitioner or you are a product manager, that you have identified a space that could benefit. You can see my screen all right? And is everything okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, yeah. So you have started with a problem where you have identified that you could benefit by developing a ML model. So what is the process like, and what are the common issues that rises in every step? And like there are multiple stages, and what are the common problems and some common practice we do in industry to solve them and tackle them. So this talk, I mean, this is a very generic concept. So in this talk, I'm not going to be talking about deep learning or any of the unsupervised learning or anything. If you know that it is a supervised learning problem, and how do you start with a very simple ML model, and what are the problems you will have to remember to identify and solve. So getting started, let's do a quick recap of what we know, that what happens in the model development. First thing is we start with the data collection. We go to different data sources and we collect several data sets from several sources, and which is like suitable for our problem here. And the next thing will be identify what are the meaningful features for the problem you are developing the ML model for. What are the meaningful features, and then extract them and do some transformations on that. The third thing is where you experiment with different ML algorithms, like is a logistic regression good or a random forest good, or what is good, and like experiment with different of them and then go about it. So the data collection step. So the data collection step is like simply like going with multiple sources and like collecting the data you need. This might seem like the step where as an ML practitioner, either as an ML engineer or a data scientist, it might look like the activity or the thing that is needed from the data scientist is very minimal, but you play a very crucial role in consulting them in figuring out some of the problems here. So to know about the problems, let's first classify the data into three categories. First thing is behavior data, and the second is feedback and synthetic data. Jumping into what they actually mean. So behavior data is where something like how did a particular user behave when using a product or a service. For example, I am a YouTube user, and how did I behave when using YouTube can be represented by some features or like some elements from certain data, right? Some things like categories of the videos I watched, what did I search, what did I like, dislike, and the number of the time spent in watching a video. They all represent something about customers' behavior when using a particular product. So usually in behavior data, what are the skills involved in collecting the behavior data? These are like done by different set of people in that particular company, but like let's go and see like how can we structure them so that we know what problems we as ML practitioners will be facing. The first thing will be to implement a data ingestion pipeline, like something complicated to extract data from different sources and doing the join operations, and so that like you and so that it is streamlined, you get data for every week, for every day, and so on. The next thing is product research. Someone who's a domain expert or someone with the product knowledge should come and tell us that extract these things, like something that identifies about this particular elements from the customers and so on. The third thing is obviously big data engineering. Once you know it is behavior data, other than very few exceptions, it is always going to be a big data. And so you will need software engineers who know Spark and Hadoop, who is developing the infrastructure there. So what happens with everything? So the first thing is, once you know the data will not be available in a single source, you always know that the data engineer who is extracting the data will always have a preference towards the source that is easy to collect. Let's say an example that you are developing a model to forecast what the weather of the day will look like. So the data, you might have been requested, like, I need 10,000 samples or 100K samples to develop my model. So what will happen is a data engineer might collect something that is easier for them to collect, like, let me took that samples only from last week or some only from one place or something. What happens is that when they look at the source, it is easier for them to collect. It might not be representative of the problem you're building the model for. So it actually has to represent the right data distribution of the model you're building. So even though the ML practitioner, the data scientist, won't be doing it by themselves, they are going to play a crucial role in consulting them and in doing these trade-offs. Like, I prefer collecting it from the archive from the last 5 years and rather than taking it from the simpler source, like just from the last week. The next thing is big data science problems. So once you know it is going to be a big data, you know that doing any form of manual analysis is going to be not possible at all. Otherwise, like, what if it is not a big data that like, as an ML scientist, I have to confess that I have done manual analysis and a lot of times, going over the text one by one, going over the image sometimes one by one to understand what is the pattern here, what my model is predicting and not. But once I know I'm dealing with big data, I have to start with statistical techniques and stick to them. Like, start with something very simple as mean and variance, and that should be enough. And stick on to it, like, and in learning something that is helping learning the distribution of the data. And like, so anything that involves manual in case of a big data, even going through thousands of them, won't be sufficient. So the second category is feedback data. In this particular category, is like, I as a user have explicitly reached out to my customer as saying that as a service owner or like a product owner, explicitly reached out and asked my customer, hey, how did I perform? Did I answer the question correctly? Did I perform to your expectations and so on? So this piece of information is going to represent something very valuable inside your business, right? And there will always be need to use this data into a machine learning model. So what are the skills involved in, again, collecting the data? So one thing is, whenever it is about feedback data, since it is like a confidential piece of information the user is willing to share with you as a product owner, it always requires some secure data pipelines to be developed. It requires the confidentiality to be maintained right from where the customer has given the information to you until it reaches you. So, and it requires some product research to be done. So like, what is the appropriate medium to reach out? How do I phrase the question? How do I phrase the question that they are not instantly saying yes when they are saying they are actually giving me the right answer? And should I send them a notification through email, or should I just pop out as a voice message? Especially when using Alexa, it asks for feedback multiple times. So this is what is happening in the feedback data. So what is the problem of a machine learning practitioner here? Once you know the engineering team is building some secure data pipeline, they will always try to trade off on something very critical for you, which is the randomization. They will try to build a feedback pipeline, which is collecting feedback from only very specific set of customers, like collecting feedback from only specific geographic location, because it is easier to do the design that way, because it requires some confidentiality design, and so it is easier that way. And only getting feedback from a specific time of the day, because they will be like, we can't keep the feedback loop running all throughout the day, so let's keep it only from one time to another time. So what does it mean when they bring the data to you? It does add some critical business value, but can you use the same data and build a model with it? Because as you can see, randomization is the key when you are collecting any form of data. If the data collector does not have the element samples randomly selected, it means it carries some bias in it already. So you can't use it to generally represent how everybody else behave. For example, if the feedback is collected only from afternoon 2 to 5, can it exactly represent how the customers are feeling throughout the day for the same behavior? No, right? Because it weighs in and weighs out on certain functionalities and features. So that is taken away. This is something you can't control sometimes, but this has to be accounted for at the later stage of modeling, or it has to be a design influence from the ML practitioner that, hey, this is something which is very critical in the next stage. The third example is synthetic data. As we can see, the data is not available. So we are trying to create our own data by saying that let's ask user to write down handwritten notes for us so that we have the handwritten data. Or else let's reach out to volunteers to speak out something for us so that we have the audio data with the transcript. So what happens in the synthetic data is find like as we can commonly see, finding the right tool and the right network of people who will work with us is very difficult. The next thing is again building a data pipeline which is going to collect all the synthesized data for us. And this is a costlier operation, right? Because like as soon as you are reaching out to volunteers to do something for you, like handwritten or something, the cost associated with it is going to like go up. So like as soon as the monetary elements comes in, you as a ML practitioner who is depending on the data will have to look at some trade-offs or remember some techniques to overcome it. Some things like what happens is that whenever you are using synthetic data, you can't afford to repeat many samples. So basically that if you know that some samples are heavily weighed or like it is needed more in the model, you can't keep going asking users to again and again repeat it for you, like say the same sentence again and again because it is an important sentence, because no, you are paying more for it, so you will have to learn some stratified sampling techniques later on and not waste the resource on repeating the sample sometimes. So yeah, this wraps the data collection. So we collect from different data sources and then we select some end samples which we are going to feed the model on. The next stage in the process is going to be feature extraction. So what is feature extraction? You as you can see, there are different categories of features that are being extracted. So if I have to give out a template on what are the different categories of features that are being extracted, these are the different blueprint we follow. Some things like how to go about feature extraction is that we start with profiling the customer, saying that let's we know the entity we are designing this model for. So let's start with profiling it. Like for example, if you are designing something for a user, what is the age group and what is the gender and so on, like if that has to do with how they will be behaving, so that is one thing. The second thing is aggregating the behavior. So this is very common in behavior data. We'll see in the latest stages how did a particular user behave with respect to this one item for this particular time period is a form of aggregating the behavior. And density features, this is again very common in text and image data and like or synthetic data and otherwise, or where you have a condensed form of like or you have some text information which is describing something and you want to condense it, like something like bag of words features, and these come under this category of density features. And contextual features, like whatever you are extracting for this particular entity, look around and extract for some related entities and feed it into the model so that it can learn from the context as well. So an example of behavior data features, like behavior features, is that how much time does a particular user spend on Facebook? So we have three things here. What is the aggregation specific to? So it is like very specific to this one particular user's session. And what is the method? What is the aggregation method? You are taking the average or the sum of the total number of time, number of hours or minutes that is spent, or the average minutes a particular user spent for every day or so. And the timeline you're looking for like 1 week of data, or like for every day, like the timeline can be like, what is it or the overall timeline you're considering, and what is the thing that is you say that represents the behavior, something like a grain. So like for 1 hour, how many minutes a particular user was on Facebook? Like let's average it out for a week period. So this represents some analytics, behavior, and everything condensed in it. So every element of it has to be researched and has to be experimented. The second like category, as I mentioned, is density features. As you can see, like for an image and for a bag of words, how many words of like this particular keyword was present of, or if for a handwritten a symbol, like we are spreading it out in circles and saying in this particular bin, how many of the points were present. So it's like here I'm saying that one of the 17 point was present in the third circle, second bin or something. So it can help us condense the shape into a particular set of vectors, and similarly like the words into the set of vectors. So next, going to the step of transformations. We are going to do some transformation or the other when we start with the feature extraction. So like, what is the first thing? First thing, as data scientists, we would have always started with studying the histogram of the features we have collected. We plot the histogram and then we see that what it is like. What we like to see and what we don't like to see are like something very easy. What we don't like to see, all the instances are having the same feature, meaning like the feature is either completely useless, or all the features, all the instances are having a completely different feature instance, meaning the feature instance, like the feature attribute is so widespread that it is not going to have any meaningful information inside the model. So what we do like to see is like things forming a cluster nicely and like visually representing that, hey, all these particular category belonging together and all these other categories belonging together. So can we study all of them in the histogram? No, but like the histogram does give some important signals that should we do some transformation or not. So one example is binning. So the image on the left hand side is like what the age of the person represents, and if it is if a particular for something like let's say what is the age of the person like who shop at Amazon or something. So the image on the left hand side is about if a person of that particular age exists or not who shop at Amazon, and what is the frequency of that. So basically, if I'm taking every individual age one by one as a number, here I'm not including any meaningful features to my model, because I'm saying that the person is of age 11 and so it doesn't mean anything, and the person is of age 37, there are two people and it doesn't mean anything. Whereas bint age is looking like this, like and like whereas like it is clustered, saying that there are very less users of less than 20, and there are few users of range 20 to 30 and so on. So what does it represent? Like, so what are we learning from here is that as soon as things started clustering into some group, we can see that we can define behavior corresponding to one group or the other. And so what happens in binning? So as we can see from the histogram, that the second histogram is giving us some meaningful information about it. So how do we get from the one to second? Like there are three types in binning. One is fixed length. We say that for every 10 years, group into a particular bin for every value of 10. And quantile. So which means that for every percentile value, select a particular bin. And the third thing is very important, which is custom binning, which even though binning is very simple, sometimes this custom binning concept can be really useful because the product research team can give you some valuable input in deciding what is the bin structure. So for example, here the bin age is kind of like a custom binning, because the information that try to classify if the user belongs to the category of 20 to 30 and 30 to 40 and more than 40 and to just three different bins, and not like every 10 years and into one different bin, is something like a custom logic we have incorporated. That is from the product research that, hey, these users have a tendency to shop alike, so let's format these features in this particular format. And the log transformation is also one of the important feature representation technique. What is happening in log transformation is that whenever the tail of the distribution is very large, it'll help us condense that information into the same category. As you know, that the log transformation is very effective for taking the tail of the transformation into one simple one single structure. So it is also a very important transformation when you know that the feature you are dealing with has a very long tail distribution. So once you plot the histogram and you are seeing a long tail represented, you know that log transformation could be very benefited because it is not wasting a lot of feature space in differentiating between 100 and 100k, because you know that the tail is very large. So all you have to do is how to discriminate the initial segments of the feature. So yeah, and the next thing is model training. How do we start with model training? We ask these common questions. What is the size of the data set? And is there any unequal class distribution in the data set? And do these features independently, can they function, or they depend on each other for a better result? And will they require any interaction or anything? So when you know that you have fewer samples, you have two things to do the pros and cons here. There are two types of models, as we all know, discriminative and generative. Discriminative models try to say that it tries to derive a function by saying how two particular instances and can be separated by a boundary. How can I say how can I define a function which says that this particular instance is class A and this particular instance is class B? Whereas generative model is going to focus more on trying to say that, hey, this is how the distribution of these classes are looking like. So now I'll try to see when I have a new sample, where to place this particular sample at. So in comparison, like the overall general comment is that, I mean, generative and discriminative models is a topic on its own. But when you know that you are making a decision for your model building algorithm, it is usually that generative models have a tendency to perform better even with very less samples. So that is a thing to keep in mind. And the next thing is bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is a statistical technique which says that when you randomly draw samples after replacement, like even though you have few set of samples, it generalizes very well. It doesn't go with a higher variance. It generalizes the distribution of the sample really well. So bootstrapping is the core concept which random forest is relying on, which is like also called as like bagging, which is like randomly drawing the set of features again and again from the same set of samples. So what happens is that for an algorithm like random forest, it is building several classifiers from a concentrated set of samples by repeatedly drawing from that like 100 number of times or 200 times. It is able to generalize it very well for the same set of samples. So another problem is, the question is you have to ask is, do I have the classes to be imbalanced? So how do I choose my training algorithm, or how do I tweak my training algorithm accordingly? An example of imbalanced classes is feedback data. So once you ask the users, how am I performing? So let's say we are an excellent service or an excellent product, when you know that 95% of the time it is positive feedback, but even then we want to improve on the 5% negative cases. And so we want to actually predict what every user is going to be like. So if you just simply model on that, then if the model is going to be saying that it's always going to be a positive experience, then even though the accuracy of the model will not even be a good measure, because it might say that 95% of the time you are right. So the model is going to be like 95% accurate. A 95% accurate model, we won't be thinking of improving it, but we know that we are not doing a good job. All we are doing saying is that it is going to be a positive feedback. So what happens, how can we improve this is that downsampling the dominant class by saying that randomly throwing away some of the positive feedback data and then feeding it into the model. And then, yeah, the inverse of it, like upsampling the class that is like imbalanced. So for the negative feedback, like randomly repeating some of the samples. So the penalty, so giving a different weight for different classes is one of the common techniques, which is like, once you know your class is imbalanced, in your modeling algorithm, you're trying to give some partiality towards the imbalanced class, saying that, hey, you know that if this is a negative feedback, so try and account for its error with a higher weight than the positive feedback errors. So if you are trying to miss out on a negative feedback, treat it with more penalty at the time of training. So this is an information that it is given as a class weight whenever you are training any of your classes. Like random forest has a method to do it, and then linear logistic regression has a way to do it, and so on. And the idea here is you're missing out on the penal minority class is going to be penalized so much more, and that will be treated with a higher penalty score. So the third question is features should interact. So how do you know if you want your features to interact? An example is that it can be Prime Video or Netflix. You're starting with what movies you're recommending for your users, and depending on what they have liked before. And you have this profile-based feature for the user and for the movie. What is the age and frequently liked actors and who directed and so on. Just to say that, like if the genre of the movie is comedy and the user has already liked comedy, you can recommend that movie. It's like, yeah, that is like a safest path to say that, right? But if you want this type of interaction to happen as you are learning in your ML algorithm, the choice of the models is always going to be like a tree-based model. That is often the choices that should be given higher weight, given that it is doing the feature interactions for you for free rather than you doing some kind of post processing by making the features interact with each other. So the choices will be like decision tree, random forest, or gradient boosted trees. Anything which are tree based are going to do these feature interactions for you at the time of modeling. So look back at the problem space and see if the features have to interact with themselves for a better score. So how do you evaluate any of these models? Like that it is the evaluation metrics, you can write a book about it. It's like a lot to talk about. Let me go over some of the important elements here. So classification, you can simply look at what is the overall prediction accuracy. Starting with that, like that is a starting point to say that is my classifier better than somebody else's or not? Like because when you enroll in a Kaggle contest or something, this is all will be the first thing you look at. But when you're deploying a model, will this even carry? Will this is? I wouldn't say like this is all you can care about when you're launching the product, because you need to look at so many other things. So the next thing is you will always start with the recall and precision. So what is recall and what is precision? So like as we know, there are two classes, let's say positive and negative. There are true positives, meaning the positive samples which has been identified right by the model, and the false positives, meaning that is actually a different class, which is like a negative class, but is being identified as positive, which is also known as false alarms, meaning that the positive class means like you're testing it for something, and it is and the negative class means that you don't have to care about it. And like so the positive and negative difference actually very much heavily relies on the use case of the problem you're modeling for. And like it outside the particular use case, you can't generalize anything as positive and negative. Recall is usually very sensitive to misses. More you miss, the more you miss about of a particular class, the recall will drop, and it'll help you identify if you're missing out on something. Precision is very sensitive to false alarm, meaning like the more you say with high confidence the incorrect positive result, the precision will be dropping. So both these metrics should be taken into account. You all will always know that area under curve and ROC curve are the base to track them both when you're tuning for a parameter and all that. But these play a very important role when you're launching the product in prod. So macro accuracy. So as we saw that the imbalanced classes will have a different, you can't simply say that you met the classification accuracy by just looking at the metric. So giving both the classes equal weight is what macro accuracy is standing for. Recall and precision is also a way to do that. But if there are, let's say there are 10 classes and only one of them is a dominant class, then you want to give all the 10 classes equal weight in your supervised learning problem. Then going for the macro and micro accuracy is the way to go, because it is like a way of evaluating that all the classes will be having equal weight. So let me take the individual accuracy count of each and every class. So yeah, it's for regression, it's different. And what happens when you launch is that even then, it won't be directly a scientific metric, but you constantly, once you launch your product, you will constantly be measuring your customers' feedback, and you are going to be constantly like either reaching out to them for feedback or keeping some metrics to keep track of how the will they be, were they satisfied with this given particular model, or did their performance or like did their engagement drop. For example, if I launch a new model in Amazon search and users stop searching after that, does it mean that my model is performing better, or does it mean that my model is so poor that the users stop searching because of that? So these are the things we will constantly take into account when after the launch, because and try to associate with our existing offline metrics, seeing that is it does it go in line with anything, what can we improve as in our next release. So yeah, that's it from me today.